up, everybody? Welcome to the BOON podcast, where we are talking Black Next Gen ministry. So, Pervy, we got somebody special with us here today, and I am I've been geeked about this, recording this episode with you, Chuck, all week. I can't wait. I'm excited for everyone to have an opportunity to just sit at your feet a little bit. But today we have Chuck Hunt, who is a Senior Director of Training, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Fuller Youth Institute. What's up, Chuck?
Hey, what's going on, y'all?
Did I get your title right?
You did. Senior Director of Training and DEI.
Awesome. That's awesome.
I love it. So before we jump into the conversation, we're going to play a game called Culture Tags. Now, Chuck, this game is pretty cool. It's pretty fun. I'm not even going to talk about what Candace did last time. They can go watch the last episode.
Y'all trying to put me on the spot.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm still embarrassed. I'm still ashamed.
Don't be. It's all good. You're going to make up for it this time. I believe in you.
Let us pray.
So we have different categories, and so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give both of you one from church. All right, so we'll start off church. Y'all should know church, okay? You should know. And so this particular one is a saying. It's from the Bible, but you hear.
You gotta hold it up. You gotta let it see it.
I got you.
But my brain don't work like that. We got different learning styles, right?
So I'm gonna give Chuck this one first. Then I'll go to Chuck, so you can see how this goes.
I feel you,
Chuck. What is that one?
Oh my goodness!
Before, how is it? I will praise God myself before I let this happen.
Oh, I got it.
Will cry out. That's the one. That's the one.
There we go. All right, now, Kez, I know you got this one because this is every black, not just church brother, every black person says this. All right. When it comes to witnessing to the goodness of God, what do we say?
Oh, he's been better to me than I've been to myself.
There you go.
There we go. Awesome. That's what's up.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
One more?
Yeah, let's do one more.
All right, one more. All right, let's go with family and friends. We'll do family and friends. All right. So this is something your mama would say if she had to give you instructions. She had to give you instructions. She would say, because she don't want to repeat herself, so she would say,
"Oh, don't make me say it again."
Yep. There you go.
And you know what? So that's a good segue because my kids are in the other room. If they get a little bit too loud, y'all might actually hear me on this mic say, "Don't make me say it again."
Hey,
it's the next generation. So hey,
no, keep that same energy. Keep that same energy because if you tell them, "Don't make me say it again," and they do it again, what happens? They're in the other room. So you would say what? Do it again. Don't
make me have to come in there.
There we go. That's culture tags. Culture tags.
That's culture tags. That's culture tags. Quick little commercial.
That is for sure.
That's awesome. That's so fun. That's a fun game to play. I like doing that. But let's move on. Chuck, you are in senior leadership at Fuller Youth Institute. Now, for those of you all who might not be familiar with Fuller Youth Institute is a branch of Fuller Theological Seminary, right?
Yes.
And I know that
we're technically a center. So Fuller has 5 different centers attached to it, but we're technically a research center of Fuller Seminary.
And that research center has really, really just been at the center and continues to be at the center of a lot of research and pioneering youth ministry, right?
Yes. It has been for years, almost 20 years now. We've been absolutely at the center of that.
Mm-hmm. So, that's awesome. Yeah. And to me, y'all have put out a lot of great resources, like, thinking about like Growing Young, Sticky Faith. And then, most recently, the one that just come out with 3 Big Questions.
Yes.
But some of the most remarkable stuff that's come out of Fuller is around the conversation of doubt, right? And teenagers and exploring doubt. I mean, it's a lot of good stuff that comes out, but just around the area of teenagers exploring doubt and how doubt doesn't destroy faith, but just unprocessed doubt and a teenager's inability to ask questions is what really, really just destroys faith. I know for me, growing up in the church, I was raised not to ask questions of God, not to question God. It was just what the pastor said. It just was.
Yep. Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Same with me, and I think there's something about the people who are leading young people right now that really do need to have a different posture as it comes to young people, because they're coming with all sorts of questions, not just doubts, just questions out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we need to be able to provide space for those questions to sit. We were told years ago, God's not afraid of your questions, and if that's the truth, then as a leader, I can't be afraid of those questions too, but I got to be able to know how to ask those questions. I need to ask good questions back. I need to be able to connect with kids in a real important and insightful way. But that's not how I was raised, right? Like that, it was
Yeah.
like, why are you asking that? That's an answer you can find in scripture, and here it is.
Mhm.
And the answers aren't helpful in today's generation. And so Fuller has a couple resources for that. FYI does the Can I Ask That series for leaders and for students. But we really put that in all of the spaces that we put out. So, yeah.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. Chuck, how did you get to Fuller? Like what's your quick journey there?
Yeah. So quick journey. So I was born in Virginia. Then my dad didn't want to be in the South no more, so he moved us out to Southern California, and so I grew up in Huntington Beach, which is a small beach town outside of LA. And in growing up there, I think learned a lot about kind of the dominant culture, and realized that the only Black people that I was able to connect with were the sons and daughters of football players that played for the Rams and the Angels, and that was a real thing. Dad sent me back to where family was, and I went to college at Hampton University, and graduated from there, a degree in aviation. And in my time at school was a moment where I was really wrestling with the Lord and kind of asking good questions about who God was. And in a moment, God got a hold of me. And I said, all right, Lord, whatever you want. Which I didn't think was going to take me into pastoral ministry, but absolutely took me into pastoral ministry. And so a few years after I graduated, I ended up at a church in Central California as their interim youth leader. And after 9 months of that, with those particular kids, I absolutely connected with. I thought it was the greatest job that I had ever had and could ever have. And I shifted then, and I said, well, what does that mean to go next? And I struggled with that. I really did. I remember sitting down with my dad, and I said, hey, Dad, what do you think of this? I mean, you just paid for an aviation degree for me. Like, now what's next? And he just said to me, he said, son, I'd rather you be the best pastor you can be rather than a glorified bus driver. And I was like, ooh.
Wow.
And so I looked for a new job. It brought me here to Glendale, which is a city next to Pasadena. And my first real role in ministry was really right up the street from Fuller. And so for the last 26 years, I've been in and around LA doing ministry, and specifically around Fuller. I got my master's here, came back for a doctorate, finished that in 2012 in youth, family, and culture. Yeah, 26 years in ministry. The last church I was at was Lake Avenue Church in Pasadena here. I was the family ministries pastor, oversaw that ministry. A great opportunity to have connected at that. It's just a real good multicultural, multi-ethnic experience in a great city. And then left here to come to Fuller. And that's, when they opened up the job, the senior director job here, I thought, man, Fuller's given so much for me. It'd be great to see where God would lead in that. So that's how I ended up in the job here. So.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of stuck at the degree in aviation, but that's probably a conversation for a different day. You
Right.
know?
Right.
Did you want to fly planes at one point? What's up with
Well, I
that?
am a pilot. I got my
You're a
pilot's license.
pilot?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Next time I'm in Cali, it's up.
We're going on.
Yeah,
Listen, we're going
Literally,
on.
we can do that. We can do that.
literally.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah. So
That's amazing. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So at Fuller, you what exactly is it that you do there?
my job, so Fuller Youth Institute, we take research and turn it into resources. And one of those
Mhm.
resources is training, right? So our resources are kind of, books and curriculum, and we've got podcasts, we've got a bunch of things here. But then we also do training. We take those books and move them into spaces where we can dive deeper with people who need that, right? And
Hmm.
so my job is to take our resources and with alongside of our creative team and our resource team, create training out of it so that we can bring that to the people. And so imagining new ways. And because we've been around for 20 years now, we've got a library, a pretty significant library of things that we've created. And so my job is to look back through that library, continue to mine that library for things that we can bring to people
Mhm.
that is research based, that is clear and directive, and can be really supportive in how they do ministry, especially moving forward. So that's the training side of my job, and that's probably the majority of my job. And then the DEI part is both not only internal but external. So as we think about and we process how we're doing research, we've really made a hard shift to be multicultural in our research, so that
Mm.
we're not just researching dominant culture youth ministry, which has been kind of running things for the last 200 years. And I know that we're going to get into that in a little bit, but
Mhm.
that's the way that it's been. And so we've got to shift because the demographics of the world are shifting. And not only that, but we've left groups out. And so I'm just grateful to be one of the four senior directors here,
Mm.
and can kind of leaning in with what God's given me. So,
That's
So
awesome.
that's great. Let's pick your brain a little bit
all right.
on like the history of next gen culture within the Black church. Um, we had a conversation, Dave and Buster's, during a conference we all attended
Yep.
Mhm.
a
Yep.
few weeks back. And in that conversation, you were dropping bombs, just
Right and left.
like real talk, dropping bombs, so just on how
hmm
um, there have been pioneers and leaders to try to bring a change in the next gen culture and Black church and the struggles, obstacles that have happened. Can you expound on that a little bit on like what the history of next gen has been in Black culture and like what it's looked like that whole process?
Yeah, I think so here's the hard part, right? Like, so I don't know that we can talk about the pieces of the Black culture without talking about dominant culture and the way that it's shaped
Mhm.
kind of Black culture as we move forward. And so the way that youth ministry looks like today in kind of the organization, so Fuller Youth Institute and others, really started in the 80s, right? Late 70s, early 80s. You get these professional youth ministers who are being
Mhm.
paid by churches, and specifically mostly in white churches, but not exclusively,
Mhm.
to go and do ministry to kids. And I think that is something that the Black church never engaged in
Mhm.
until post civil rights. And I think that there's a real significant break in that reality, right? And I think that's something that we're fighting today,
Mm.
is the idea that youth ministry is this professionalized idea that someone comes in, we hire the people to come and do the ministry with the kids that we have, and I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be, right? That's
Yeah.
not how it has been for the Black church, and so I think that initial hurdle is really significant. Um, uh, you can go back and look at a lot of things in the church, but I think that's where that comes in today.
Can you talk to us about that standard youth ministry model that exists in
Yeah.
many churches? Like what is where like tell us where that came from.
So for that, I got to go all the way back, right? So
Take us back.
all the way
Back
back,
into
right?
time.
So let's go back to the Industrial Revolution. We're talking
Oh,
1800s,
you
right?
went way back.
I did. So you got to go back to the way that we've treated kids in this country over time, right?
Yeah.
And so before the Industrial Revolution, we've got kids that are serving in their family. They've got kids that are kind of just running around. There's not a program. There's not a thing for kids. We're just trying to get by, right? Industrial Revolution comes along, and kids are now working in factories, right? Especially in the cities and in the countries as well. They're out in the coal mines, or they're out on the field or whatever, right? And so what's the program that was created in order to help kids? Sunday school, right? Sunday school is a program to help kids be at school on Sundays so that they could learn, but they get to work in the week. And that has changed, right? So that's the first foray into these programs for kids. And then you kind of move from there into the 1800s, deeper into the 1800s, where like the YMCA is created, and the YWCA, so Young Men's Christian Association, or Young Women's Christian Association, for people who are in cities, who the kids come to the cities to work. They need a place to stay. They need a bed. They need a hot meal, and that's where they could go. And so caring for the younger generation. It changes in between 1851 and 1881. So I don't have to tell y'all about 1865, Emancipation Proclamation, and all the other things that where the Black church now is free. Black people are free, but not really, right? And so in engaging our own churches at the time, we leaned into a segregation that kept us safe. Right. And so that was a really important piece of understanding that segregation, because before, a lot of churches had the balconies, right? Balconies where Blacks could sit in the white church, right? So that they can be taught in there. So, whether it was in the cities or whether it was in the country, my great grandfather started a church in the country, and for his community and for his family, right? So that they might learn the word and be encouraged. But there's outliers too. So Azusa Street Revival happens in LA in 1906. So we're still in the midst of Reconstruction. We're still in the midst of time where Black people are getting lynched, that the KKK is on the rise. I mean, all that those things are real true. And so the Black church becomes a safe place for the family. Right. So it's not just the safe place for, people to come, and then they've got this youth ministry and people, there's a separation, but you coming into a church, we are all going to sit together as a family. We're coming and we're going to be together. And that's been the model for the Black church for decades. Right. And then you get into World War One, you get into World War Two, and I think there's something that's really important about both of those times, is that it's a moment where there are some Blacks who are rising because of the what do you call it? The GI Bill, right? So there's being money funneled into some Black communities because of that. We engage in that. We hear some things that are happening. But as we're coming out of World War II, there's a rise in understanding more about who Jesus is, right? There's a return to church because of the war, because of how much death has gone on, because of the trauma that's happened in the country, right? And so there's another shift, right? So there's a shift in 1851, and now there's another shift in 1941, the rise of Young Life, right? So 1941, Young Life starts. 1944, Youth for Christ starts. So Young Life is this small groups ministry that's going directly to campuses and engaging kids. Youth for Christ is this large group, like bring them all together. We're going to have revivals ministry in and through the 40s. Side note, Fuller Seminary started in 1947. This is a place where a lot of things were happening in churches. Billy Graham came through here. I mean, Billy Graham was one of the first full-time ministers for Youth for Christ, doing big events for them and creating that reality. And then you move into the 60s and 70s with the Jesus movement. But what's important about that is I think there's this 100-year kind of understanding, right? So you're looking at 100 years before the emancipation, and people are leaning into children in a different way. And then we kind of get together and say, all right, no, we're all right. We're all right. And then there's another 100 years before before the civil rights movement, and things change. And so the children that out on the other side of both of those realities, on the other side of emancipation and in the other side of civil rights, live in a different world. So so the people like myself, Gen X, and the Xennials, lived in a different world than our parents did. And I like to say often that I feel like I skipped a generation between me and my dad. Right. My dad was born on a slave plantation. Right. Where I was, I was born in Virginia, but grew up in Huntington Beach. There's a broad shift. Right. And
Yeah.
when I went to church, and then went to this youth ministry thing. Right. That was going on. So 1970s is really important. And in through the 70s, we're leaning into this space where now we're seeing revivals happen. The Black church is doing revivals in a lot of space and in a lot of ways. And I think what you wanted me to kind of lean into was this idea that 1970 Youth Specialties starts, right? Youth Specialties was really the first organization that went to go train youth ministers and raise up youth ministers, right? So every other organization I mentioned before was about kids, was like, how are we going to address kids? Youth Specialties was created in order to engage and connect with youth ministers and create this sense of like, oh yeah, we've got to do youth ministry in this different way, which leads me to the person that I want to talk about was Wellington Boone. And now Pastor Boone he was a Vietnam vet, came out of Vietnam, started ministry in 1973. He's a Word of Faith guy, loves the Bible, loves the scriptures. And in 1982, he starts a ministry called New Generation Ministries. And New Generation Ministries was a campus ministry, kind of like Campus Crusade, InterVarsity. Both of those came earlier. But Campus Crusade, InterVarsity, he started those at Virginia Union and Virginia State. Okay, so they were specifically in the Black church and at HBCUs. And so,
let me just say this. I just think, and that's the part that just kind of it blows me away, is that, as our team was praying about, what we're building, this network for, Black churches and leaders. And, we came up with this name BOON because it felt right as we talk more about it. Right.
mm-hmm.
And, a boon is a thing that's helpful and beneficial. That's how it's defined. Right. And we were like, oh man, that sounds interesting. And then we were literally in this room and we're like, but it's also an acronym for born out of necessity. And we were just sitting in those two, the irony of both of those in like a whoa kind of way. And then when we were at Dave & Buster's and you mentioned Wellington Boone, I mean, granted, he spells it different, but at the same time, it's like, yo, God, that's amazing to me. Yeah. I don't mean to cut off your history lesson, but that part right there is just, and I think it just is, when it comes to within Black culture of honoring the legacy and honoring the past and honoring the things that people have done before us. I love how it came together to be able to honor, Dr. Boone and the work that he's done through as we move forward and continue to push forward.
So before you jump back in, Chuck, real quick,
go ahead.
The history lesson was amazing and how that's so dope. I can't wait to go back and rewatch this to like pause and do all my history with the history lesson you gave, right? But real quick, where was the Black church when those things were starting? I know we're about to jump into Dr. Boone and what he did, but real quick, could you just let the audience know, like, what was the Black church doing during those movements? Because I know you had the Emancipation Proclamation, you had Jim Crow, you had Civil Rights Movement through that whole period of 1888 to the 60s, right? Like, where was the Black church in that?
So the Black churches were really trying to protect their own, right, and create space. And so I think there's three things about the church, specifically the Black church, that was that I think we get to highlight, right? So one is a holiness movement was happening in through that time, and people were really leaning into what was right and what was good. And prior to civil rights, there was just a sense of survival. right? And so the Black church really was surrounding its community and allowing for the community to exist. Two, they're protecting the community, right? It was a
Mm,
place where they protected the community and allowed the community to engage. And I think it was a place where we created a community identity
mm-hmm,
that wasn't a slave identity anymore. That wasn't
Right.
a separate identity, right? And so that's why the Black church, I think, is so important to our understanding about where we are, right? Is because one, if it gives us identity, if it protects us, and if it allows for us to do good work in the community. Now, good work in the community in the 60s was creating, civil rights and fighting for that, right? But what is that right now? It's standing up against police brutality. It's
mm-hmm,
engaging in moments where need to be heard. It's the political movements that we've seen over the last 20 years that have really congealed the Black community and brought together the Black vote in a way that it was falling apart. And I think those type of movements and that type of connection is really true and really helpful along the way, right? So when we talk about the Black church, we talk about a community that is a community of experience and not just a community of connection, right? So
Yeah.
I could go to Black church just like we were talking about in that game, right? I could go to Black church and know that something's going to be said, right? And
Right.
I can feel that in a lot of ways. In when we talk about that as church, there's a connective reality around it in a similar way that the Catholics have a connective reality, right?
mm-hmm,
So Catholic, I can go from one Catholic church here and expect to hear similar, if not the same things at a Catholic church
hmm,
somewhere else. If I go to a Black church, I can expect to hear similar things in a Black church. That similar experience is something that connects us over time, and I think is real and helpful. When you talk about the 60s, the Black church was utilizing its young people to move to do the movement in the
Yeah.
South. You know,
mm-hmm,
that is we can't miss that. We utilized and allowed our young people to connect that movement to a broader reality across the nation. You think about people like John Lewis, who was in his
yeah,
20s, right? When you talk about SNCC, when you talk about those student movements, that's why for me the movement about new generation ministries was really important, right?
mm-hmm,
We're moving back into like, oh, our college people, our young people are the place that we need to lean into and make sure that we're supporting them and serving them and hoping for them in a way that is really important. So the Black church has played a significant role across generations, and more importantly has done something that we're asking churches to do even more now, right? Is invite your kids to serve. That's a
yeah,
way to them be disciples, right? Black church has been doing that for years,
Yeah.
for years.
mm-hmm,
A
And I
lot of
think
our
we've
heroes
lost
were in
our
their
way in
20s,
that in a
right?
little ways.
Right. A lot of our
mm-hmm,
heroes were in their 20s when they started, like
Yep.
Dr. King and a lot of the you guys that followed him. If you know this, how old was Dr. Boone when he started the work that he did? Like, what age was that
He'd have
when
been in his
he
20s. Yeah,
20s?
he'd have been in his
wow,
20s. Yeah.
mm,
Yeah.
And so, can you
He
tell
is
us more, like so his like what was the influence? I guess what pushed him to start what he did?
yeah. And I want to hear about that. Like, were you connected with that, or what
So
was?
yeah, I feel like I had to go back and do a little research and preparing, because I was just telling you what I knew, and I was like, let me make sure.
But
And
you knew a
so
whole lot more than my baseline knowledge. Let's just start there.
yeah, so I was like, man, so Man of Word of Fellowship was a church that he had in Richmond, and he came out of Vietnam in '68, shifted. His life was given to the Lord. And 73, he starts ministry. 82, he starts New Generation Ministries as a
Mhm,
ministry that was trying to grow across college campuses for Black students. And it wasn't
mm,
just for the Black students at HBCUs, right? At one point in time, they were talking about getting it on campus at UVA and others, right? So it's trying to spread. My connection with is when I went to school, when I went to college at Hampton in 1990. So I show up there fall of 1990. I'm wrestling with my own faith. I bump into
Mm,
these kids that are connected to Richmond, that are trying to get New Generations Ministries on our campus,
mm,
and we start a Bible study together. We start that Bible study on campus there that first year. That second year, that Bible study grows to over 200 people. We had a step team, the whole nine. People are getting saved. Things are happening. So 90-91, New Generations Ministries has this conference. So 90 and 91, they have a conference. Conference was down in Virginia Beach, and there were like 2,000 people on Regent's
whoa.
campus. And their whole thing was win them, train them, and send them,
Wow.
right? Win them, train them, and send them. That was the whole idea around New Generations Ministries. And so when I think about ministries, and when you ask the question about like why can't we have why can't we have stuff for ourselves, right? I was like, when we try, we continue to cut ourselves off at the knees, right?
Mm,
And when I bring up Wellington Boone, I'm not bringing him up because I was a part of that ministry. That was ministry that was getting national attention. He was getting national attention.
Mm.
And
mm,
when I went back and did a little bit of research, I realized, oh my gosh, in 1991, the Washington Post picked it up and wrote an
wow.
article about it. So you can go Google that now and go see what was going on. There are multiple pastors that claimed that they were a part of the starting New Generations Ministry, because
Mm,
it filtered down to Atlanta, where Boone ended up. He's down there in Atlanta doing ministry. He's in his 80s now, still going. But to think about winning, training, and sending, right, which
mm,
is exactly what Youth Specialties was doing. It was
mm.
exactly what Youth Specialties was doing in terms of training and sending, but we were doing it in the Black church. Yet it didn't last. It
You know
didn't last.
what? And that's so interesting to me, just thinking about the different things of, and I don't know exactly where the parallel is, but I know there's a parallel here, and I don't know exactly, who the originator is here, but in my rooting for everybody and everything Black, I can't help but to say we started it, right? But thinking about even just in Black culture of fictive kinships, right?
Mm,
So you're thinking about like how many play aunties or play uncles or play cousins that you have,
yep.
where those originated, right? Those originated because of going back into slavery times when families were separated, and the village having to come together and support and to come together and be there for the children who now have no families, have no parents, right? And the way that has shifted and transitioned and related into church. Hey, sister so and so and brother so and so, right? And the family unit that's established within the church,
Yeah.
and how it still lives together, and how a lot of people got their first role models within the
Yeah.
church, right? The people that you first looked up to, the people that who were talking to you outside of your, your bloodline family, and looking at how now we have small group leaders,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And these small group leaders were like,
Yep.
hey, these are the people that you want essentially to do the same thing that your play aunties and your play uncles,
Absolutely.
Yep.
that's what you
Yep.
want. And
Yeah.
I just think it's just so interesting how, and I'm not saying that, everything is being, taken from Black culture, but I just think that it's so cool looking at the way that we innately within our heritage and our culture just do certain things, and how it might be taken and um in I guess, what is the word I'm looking for? Put in like a mainline kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
religion or
Yeah.
mainline space,
Yeah.
and how it's highlighted as, hey, we need to have this when we've always had that, and in thinking about the work that Wellington Boone has done, how sometimes it's so much easier. And I just wonder that whole mentality that, you think about how back in the, what was it? I think it was like the, y'all might hear my kids, my bad, y'all. But
It's all
think about
right.
like in the I guess it was what, the 40s or 50s maybe, when you
Hmm.
had the racial identification of like Black children, when you had them doing like the doll test, right? Who do you
Yes. Yes.
prefer?
Yep.
Right. And
Yes.
how at one point children preferred the dolls that were white, and they
Yeah.
didn't necessarily identify with the dolls that were Black. And then
Yep.
over time, there was Black consciousness that came into play, and how all of a sudden Black people began to identify more with Black dolls and prefer Black dolls. But then you get into the 80s and there's a decline again, right? And then the 80s and that decline happens and people start preferring the white dolls, right? And not identifying with the Black dolls again. And I just wonder how, if we look at what it is that we have, I'm bringing it all together. This is the Black preacher in me. Sorry, I got to paint the whole landscape.
Come on.
If you look at how what Dr. Boone has done, right? And then even just things that are innately within our culture, how sometimes we think that it sounds better. The ice is water, but ice is colder. Or ice is, what is it? Ice is colder.
Right.
Yeah.
On the other side, you know, and it's not always necessarily, it's not true, you know, and we have the ability to do amazing things. And we have the ability to do phenomenal things, but we've got to be able to be there and support each other, you know?
Yeah.
And,
I think
we can't discount the crack epidemic
That's right.
of the 80s.
And I was born during the 80s and I was a product of that.
Yep, gangs in 90s, gangs and turf wars in the 90s, and what that did to rip the Black community. So once again, you said earlier, Chuck, in the 60s, where we were having survival and community against our oppressors. Now we had 20 years of surviving ourselves.
Whew.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like so, and that we're still fighting that now.
We are still fighting that, and I don't know that we were surviving ourselves, because when you look back at it, we had to survive a second Reconstruction.
Yeah.
So it wasn't lynching. It was the war on drugs, right? And mass incarceration were the two ways that they came after our community. Different than allowing the community to lynch, you know, thousands of our people. They went after us and put us in prisons and put us in for stupid stuff, right? And I think the parallel is not lost on me insofar as, you know, post slavery we had Reconstruction, you know, and then post civil rights we had another Reconstruction that we had to survive, and that's part of it, right? How do we survive those things? Man, we continue to stick together, and plenty, you know, and I think, you know, Fuller is a space. We talk about others as spaces where we're invited into doing the work that they're doing, right? And there's something about that, something trying to lean in and give the gift of our community to a larger platform so more might know, right? Because we haven't had those platforms, right? We haven't had those opportunities in those moments, and I think, you know, Wellington Boone is a product of that. He went on to become a spokesperson for the Promise Keepers movement, as one of the Black pastors in the Promise Keepers movement. So I think there's moments where we've got to recognize, like, that we give it away, and that we need to give it back to our own congregations and our own churches, in ways that are really helpful. And so trying to figure out how to do research just for Black churches, right? And get people to pay for that, and get people to encourage that, because there's something about what's gone on in the Black church that continues to keep people connected to faith in a way that's not happening in some of the white churches right now.
So Chuck, with the history lesson that you've given, which is amazing, and we've talked extensively about it, how can the Black church make sure that our next gen ministries, our next gen groups are magnified and put in the forefront of church? And how can Boone come along and help those churches make that necessary?
So I love what James Baldwin says when he says that the Christian church needs to be larger, freer, and more loving. And if God can't do that, then we need to get rid of him. I think that our churches need to take on that reality, that we need to figure out how our ministries need to be larger, freer, and more loving. We need to figure out how to do that. And I think he was saying that broadly about the Christian church. But when I look back at the Black church, we've got to do that for ourselves and care for ourselves in a way that really allows for a movement forward, not to the exclusion of others, because we're looking at a huge rise in multicultural churches, multi-ethnic churches, which I'm grateful to have served in a couple of them. But there's something about clearing the way so that that can happen. And I think we need to pay attention to the people that are making waves out there in youth ministry. And they might not be the people that you may think of in on your screen, or on the TikTok or on the Instagram. But there's some folks out there that are saying things that are real helpful. I hope what I'm saying is helpful. I hope that I'm an encouragement to folks, right? I think what you're doing, Purvi, in Texas is amazing. I look at folks like Virginia Ward up in Northeast, who's killing it at Gordon Conwell. Like, pay attention to what she's doing and what she's growing there. You look at scholars like Almeda Wright, who's at Yale. You look at Eric Williams, who is currently the resource director for religion at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. He's there, but I think soon he's going to be at Duke. You got to look at people that are leaning into that. My man Rondell Eskridge over at Faithful Central here in LA, he's just leaning in, and I think there's some folks that we need to pay attention to in our community, and when we pay attention to them, I'm inviting them to be generous, right? They've got to be generous with what they know and what they have, so that we can continue to grow things. And what I hope, Candace, for BOON is that we become a convener of the ideas, right? That we bring people together so that those ideas are shared, so those resources are shared, so that we're pointing to the right directions and connecting in the right spaces.
I love that.
Wow. I do too. Chuck, you have been a wealth of knowledge in this conversation. And I am beyond grateful for your willingness to share here in this space. There's something that I've said, and I feel like I've said it 1,000 times to some people who worked alongside us and helping, BOON to get to the place where we are now, even though, we still got a little ways to go, but we gained some traction. But it's a remarkable thing to have a vision and people are willing to get behind you to make it happen. There's something so beautiful about that when people say, hey, yeah, I see it too, and I'm willing to hop on it too. And I think a huge part of people being willing to hop on it is people who have seen some history, right?
Yep.
Are committed to the cause.
Yep.
And they see, hey, it's time for us to rise. It's time for us to, have, and I'm not saying, hey, I don't believe in competing. I don't take score when I play cards because I don't believe in a competition. It makes me nervous, right?
I do. That's why you got me. I'm tallying, baby. I'm tallying.
Yes,
that ain't me. That's so funny. But yeah, I just want to say to you, Purvi, to you, Chuck, thank y'all for being willing to hop on with this, and all the other people who have too, because I think it's important to know where we've been. It's important to know the history. It's important to know the role that the Black church has played in a grander scheme, the broader world of children and youth ministry. So this is awesome. So thank y'all for joining. If anyone is looking to get connected with BOON, you can go to thebooncommunity.com and check us out and see what we have listed, what's going on there. If you are on Facebook and you want to become connected with one of our national network, find us on Facebook. Find our Facebook group. We're called the BOON Community on Facebook. And I would love to, I'm excited about this. I'm excited about what it is that we've done so far. I'm excited about where God has taken us and what we've got planned so far. Give a shout out to our producer lurking in the background, Ashley Johnson. Hey girl, thank you for being on this journey with us too today. All right, y'all, until next time, peace.